Before doing any research, I would think that government regulation would be the way to solve wage discrimination. After digging a little bit deeper, I realized that the free market will be responsible for it because previous government regulation has not been successful. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 mandates that both men and women make the same amount of money for the substantially same work. Although, as NBC News states, 55 years later, and there's been minimal change. Personally, I don't believe that government intervention will help the cause anymore. I believe that people have a mindset one way, and it's next to impossible to change it. Any law or any government can say, hey, you can't do this or you can't do that, but it's next to impossible to improve that's what happened, or there's always a way to say that this person's better than that person for a certain job, no matter their physical qualities. According to econreview.berkeley.edu, Milton Friedman, in his work in Capitalism and Freedom, argues that one of the largest benefits of a free market system is that it protects people from, quote, being discriminated against in their economic activities for reasons that are irrelevant to their productivity, end quote. In a competitive free market, he explains, any firm that discriminates on the basis of race, gender, ideology, or any other attribute unrelated to worker performance imposes a cost upon themselves, and thus the owners would eventually be driven out of business by firms that do not discriminate. Friedman then concludes that the free market actively works to encourage moral behavior and offers a shield for vulnerable groups in society, and that it is best and most efficient method of doing so. For a good example, Milton Friedman also argued that this process is what ended the Hollywood blacklist that arose during the Red Scare of the 1950s. Many actors, actresses, and screenwriters suspected of being communist sympathizers were placed on widely distributed blacklists. Movie studios initially refused to hire anyone on these lists. However, the blacklist created a large pool of qualified workers who were unemployed and thus willing to work for lower wages. Many studios could not resist the temptation to hire this cheap labor, while those that still refused to do so faced higher production costs as their workers were relatively more expensive. In the end, all the studios ignored the blacklist and wages returned to normal. Friedman's example about the Red Scare is exactly why I believe the free market system, rather than government regulation, will help with the wage gap and wage discrimination. Labor wage discrimination is magnified through education, through this bar graph here. It's from NorthCarolinaJustice.org. You can see that at every level of education, men are making substantially more money than women. This bar graph here, the description that I read below it, attached to this article, says that for these comparisons of numbers, it's the same job, same skill, and virtually the same person, other than the gender being different. Blue obviously being the male, orange being the female. Every aspect of education, men are making significantly more money. Labor discrimination is magnified through teen employment. Just based on this chart here, I know it's not necessarily for teen because it says 20 to 24-year-olds, but I thought this chart was very important to share. In all the major cities, or most of the major cities in the United States, this breaks down the employment by race and ethnicity in the largest areas. Although it is from 2014, I still believe it is important. You can see the total percent of this age group that is employed and what makes up that percent. Notice how black people are 12% lower in the U.S. total than white people. This magnifies that the labor market favors white people. Wage discrimination can be magnified through housing by looking at white versus black first home and first mortgage values. You can see that an average white person's first home value is $13,000 greater than a black person's, but if you look at the debt, it's the complete opposite. They have an average mortgage of $16,000 greater than a white person. Another magnification of wage discrimination can be among incarcerated people. At this line graph, you can see that the unemployment rate for incarcerated people in 2008 was 27%. Although this isn't directly related to wages, this does correlate to employment discrimination. you can see that there's a much steeper unemployment rate, of 27% compared to the national average of less than 4%. You can tell based on this chart that they are being discriminated against because of their past offenses.